Thank you for listening to the BJJ Brick Podcast. We'll be bringing you Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and good times. We hope to flatten your Jiu-Jitsu learning curve, help you get the most out of your grappling ability, and meet your goals both on and off the mat.
Welcome back to the BJJ Brick Podcast. Today we have episode 258. We have an awesome episode today. We have the one, the only Robert Drysdale. He's going to stop by and talk to us. He's going to drop a lot of knowledge, and I cannot wait for that. If you go and get some popcorn, you better do it now. You do not want to miss the interview portion of the show. But today, as always, I'm here with my compadres, Mr. Byron Jabara and Joe Thomas. How are you guys doing today?
Good. The popcorn is delicious.
It is. I'm doing good down here, Gary. How are you?
I'm doing fabulous. I'm so excited for this episode. Robert Drysdale has always been one of the guys I've always, watched compete in MMA. I've watched, a ton of his videos and tried to emulate his game. So I'm really excited about this episode.
Yeah, he has this documentary coming out. It's kind of like a historical look at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the roots of that. And it sounds like it's going to be an amazing learning tool that he's making. And of course, after we talk about that, also get him for some just general jiu-jitsu questions. And tremendous amount of knowledge coming from him today, and really excited for his closed guard documentary that he's working on, and hopefully that'll be out very soon. We don't have a date on that for sure, but go follow him on social media if you don't already, and follow the project, and that we can keep up with it. So as soon as it comes out, she'll be all over that, because this will be it's an important thing to know. Something that, okay, you're listening to a podcast about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You have the interest. You should know some of the history, and I don't think you could get a more clear, truthful look at the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu than what Robert Drysdale is going to bring us. So excited about having him on the show today, but really pumped also about what he's doing and all the hard work he's putting in for this project. So that's going to be amazing. Two amazings. One is the interview, and then one is the documentary when it comes out.
Yep, and speaking of amazing, you definitely want to check out Byron's audiobook. We have a link to it on the show notes. It's called Your First Year in BJJ. The first year, in my opinion, is always the hardest, and our goal here at the BJJ Brick Podcast is to grow jiu-jitsu, and we want people to get through that first year. That's the year it seems like most people drop out. So Byron has kind of made a roadmap to what's going to happen in your first year, what to expect, hopefully take all the surprises out and make it that much easier for you. I mean, it's everything from, my favorite is the benefits of jiu-jitsu. I've seen so many people lose, 100 pounds, get off blood pressure medicine, get stronger, get more flexible, to what moves to work on, what school to pick. That's a big one right there. If you're, got more than one school, some places only have one school around, but if you've got multiple schools to choose from, you definitely want to pick one that fits you. You're definitely going to have a better chance or even better chance to stick with it, or has a better schedule for you. Some places only have classes at night. You may be working second or third shift and need classes in the morning. So that's going to make a big thing. But definitely check it out. We have a link to it in the show notes. 2.5 hours of content. It gets great reviews. And even if you have been training for a while, it's great to pick it up and go back on all that stuff. Or, buy it for a gift. Get it for some of your new training partners. Definitely will help their game out.
Yep, check out the link in the show notes. We'd be honored to help you through your first year of training. We do like to have a off-the-mat lesson, and I think I have a decent one, my friends, and an off-the-mat lesson that will drag back onto the mat and kind of extract a little bit of jiu-jitsu knowledge or an idea from that is what we're going for here. I was invited to a birthday party. My sister-in-law.
Wait, real quick, Byron.
Yeah, what's up?
Somebody,
Gary?
do they know you?
Yeah,
they actually invited you?
It was. They were obligated, family.
Well, let's be honest. They invited Byron's wife.
That is true.
Okay, they invited Becky.
That is accurate because I'm married to Becky, and it's her side of the family.
And they gave you the right time and date?
Yeah.
They didn't give you a wrong time and date?
And we showed up, and everybody, they didn't kick me out right away.
Okay.
So
sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to clarify something before you go on.
Okay, thanks, Gary. I know the story seems suspicious already. But anyway, this was a party that had mostly adults. I mean, my sister-in-law's in her early 30s, and a couple of kids, but not many. But my sister-in-law wanted to have some kind of fun and cut loose. And she said when she was a child, they would tie a balloon with a string to the ankle of everybody, and then you run around trying to stomp on everybody else's balloons while trying to keep your balloon from being stomped on. And she wanted to play that game that she did at, that was kind of like a party game that they would do. And so she had 15 or so balloons, and we tied them to everybody's ankles. And I wasn't really excited. I mean, it's fun. I like to do something that's a little different, but I wasn't gonna try to win this thing and go full jiu-jitsu style on everybody's balloons. But as soon as we started, her grandmother kind of her mindset changes, I guess. Her grandmother's in her mid-80s, and I see her attempt to step on somebody else's balloon and stumble, and then she would have fallen, except she was able to land on the couch. I was like, oh, this is bad. She's going to get hurt. And so I walk kind of a little bit towards her. She gets off the couch, smiles, like, okay, lady, I've seen a lot of people your age break their hips and arms and wrists, and like you are cruising for a bruising if you're trying to stomp on everybody's balloon like you're 10 years old. And she gets up off the couch, smiles, and looks for other balloons. And I'm like, oh, this is bad. She starts running over kind of closer to me, and she stumbles again. She's just like, the act of lifting up her foot to stomp on these balloons, which are pretty big balloons, is making her stumble. And I grab her arm to keep her from falling. I was like, okay, I gotcha. And I literally stop her from falling onto the floor, and then she stomps in my balloon. I was like, oh, that's hilarious. She got me. But, pick this onto the map. We're all new at this, but only some of us really care about stomping in the balloons. She was just having fun, but a new person can go super hard. Now, you want to try to protect them from going too hard or putting themselves in spots that could actually damage either or both of you. And so, if you're a more experienced grappler, grappling with a new person, try to slow them down a little bit if they're going too fast or too hard. And you could do that physically, or you could do that by talking to them. Hey, slow down a bit. We're trying to learn things here as we go. Yeah, we'll go hard, but you need to at least have some fundamentals down before you are going hard. That way you're not making large mistakes or possibly just kind of, spazzing out and injuring people. And that, what I saw that day was the equivalent of her operating outside of her ability to function. I mean, every time she stomped on a balloon, she almost fell, except for the time she stomped on mine because I was holding her up. And that's how I lost the game really fast. But it was hilarious, that the fact that I saved her from falling and then probably got my balloon stomped on by her. I enjoyed the whole thing. It was hilarious.
That actually sounds like Gary's grappling style when he goes on the mats and sort of stumbles and his opponent reaches out to help him and Gary does the arm drag and it's all over.
Nice. It definitely works. But, the one thing I was thinking about that, Byron, you're talking about our lesson learned there is, the one big lesson, I'm taking out of all this is, Byron, I don't think you should make excuses for losing. Sometimes it's easy to make excuses that we've lost and why, but I don't think that's going to help you in the long run. You just need to accept it and train harder. I mean, we're all going to lose, and there's nothing wrong with losing. Sometimes in my opinion, it's best to be the bottom person in that room. You've got the most to go, and people to learn from. So, Byron, if I were you, I mean, this is my constructive criticism to you. Just learn. Stop the. Don't make excuses, lose with dignity. And, I think you'll be much better off.
I take that to heart.
No shame in getting your ass whooped by an 80-year-old woman.
Yeah, nothing.
So, I mean, you're right, Gary. That woman in her mid-80s, she bested me that day. And I need to just move on and work on getting better shoes and stomping better on balloons.
Yeah, I mean,
now it's the shoes. Now it's the shoes.
Dang it, another excuse popped in. It's just natural.
Byron, repeat after me. I lost badly. And I will work hard to improve myself. My goal for the next month is to emulate my idols, Joe and Gary.
I don't know if I can say that part. My goal
not with the straight face.
last month is to emulate my idols, Joe and Gary, and beat these elderly women in sporting events. After the extra part in. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, but everybody knows that's not true. But okay.
Yeah, usually you guys don't beat them. Hey.
Yeah.
We have a quote of the week, gentlemen, from Babe Ruth.
Oh, the candy bar?
Before the candy bar, there was a baseball guy.
Oh, George Herman Ruth?
The Babe.
The Babe.
Babe Ruth said a lot of things. This is one of them. Yesterday's home runs don't win today's games.
And I like that quote. You can't live off yesterday's victories.
Yep, I still think about Gary. You know, he's like Uncle Rico, talking about playing football back in the day and how great he was. He's living off those
we would have won the
past.
state championship if Coach would have just put me in.
That's in the past, Gary. You got to move forward. You got to, Gary's even tried to travel back in time with some
I tried
crystals.
to build a time machine, me and my nephews.
It just shocked him and left him sterile. No, but really, it's great to accomplish things. A lot of us are working hard towards goals that are very challenging and difficult to reach. But once you reach the goal, I'm all for celebrating it, getting some recognition from those that have helped you or those that admire you or whatever. But after a little while, what's next? What is your next goal? And it doesn't always need to be the same. It doesn't always need to be, I just won this local tournament, time to win a regional tournament. But you should always have a goal in mind, and you shouldn't be resting on your past accomplishments. And if you look at like Robert Drysdale, man, tremendous accomplishments on this guy's history, and he's trying to do something that is very difficult to make this documentary. He's not resting on, I'm one of the best grapplers on the planet. He's one of the best grapplers on the planet, and he's making a documentary, a film about history, not about like himself or his team or anything like that. I'm really impressed by getting this quote and looking at him. He's a perfect example of that. He's not wearing his medals around, on his neck all the time, and nobody really does that. But some people do that, emotionally. They rest on past accomplishments for a long time, and you just keep. I think it's more productive and more healthy to look forward to what's next. And Gary's, he's talking about home runs. He hit a home run off of a T-ball one time, and he mentions that about every week.
Well,
it was close at the plate, but he wasn't going to let that 5-year-old stop him.
Yeah, I kind of like Pete Rose, the guy. I just ran him over and put him out. He shouldn't have been blocking the plate. And it would have been an easy home run, but I noticed the pitcher, had a little Vaseline on the ball, so they were cheating too.
What do you mean, too? Is that an excuse, Gary?
Oh, yeah, I always make excuses. But, Byron, though, what did you say a little bit before that? I actually did hit the home run.
That's true.
And rounded the bases. You lost.
To a lady in her mid-80s.
Nothing wrong with that.
Well, that's true. But to steer this ship back on course, we'll transition smoothly to the interview with Robert Drysdale. Here we go. He is the most interesting grappler in the world.
He once started a wave at ADCC. 23 people drowned. He has vowed to never repeat this act of carelessness. He did forward rolls to the top of Mount Everest. He once shrimped so hard he accidentally opened a Red Lobster.
I don't always listen to podcasts, but when I do, I prefer the BJJ Brick podcast. Go for the submission, my friends.
All right, my friends, I'm happy to bring Robert Drysdale to the BJJ Brick podcast. Robert, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
You're one of the best grapplers on the planet. You've got a long history in the sport, but you've kind of done a little bit of things on the side as well as far as what you're doing now. If you wouldn't mind giving yourself a little bit of introduction to the people who may not be familiar with you, and also include what you're up to now.
Yeah, I've been training jiu-jitsu for 20 years now. I started in Brazil as a teenager. I trained in Las Vegas for 2 years at the John Lewis Pederneiras Association in Las Vegas then. I moved back to Brazil. I trained there for another 8 years. That's where I got my black belt under, at the time, Team Braza. And been in Vegas for 10 years now. I run my own school. I've competed extensively, gi and no gi. I've fought MMA professionally. I've trained a lot of MMA fighters, like a few UFC champions. Now I'm involved in a documentary production to tell the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, to some degree a little bit of the history of MMA as well, because there's a lot of overlapping. They're parallel stories. We're going to touch briefly on the history of MMA, but to be fair, that would be a film in itself, but there's some of that going on as well. And I mean, there's a lot of other projects. Like I run an association. We have over 120 affiliates worldwide. That's a job in itself. I'm also a grad student at UNLV. I keep myself busy. I run seminars worldwide. I don't have short days. Put it like that.
You're a busy guy, and your association is how kind of I got to get connected with you. Chris Hubner, he's a guy in Wichita. He's like, you should interview Robert Drysdale, and I said, of course I should. I'd love the opportunity, and so thanks, Chris, for that, getting you on here. So the big project you're doing now is the documentary. What is it called?
It's called Close Guard: the Origins of Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil. So it goes back to where we're starting with the formation of Kodokan, because that's really the origin of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? It's Kodokan Judo, and why it departed from classical the Rus schools in Japan, and how Kodokan was formed. It's briefly. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it because, the primary problem we have in this documentary is telling a lot of history, over 100 years of history, in fact, in 90 minutes. And that is very, very challenging, So we're trying to squeeze in as much information in there as possible while being entertaining and while being able to explain it to a lay audience. So we begin with the formation of, Kodokan and that chaotic environment of like various jiu-jitsu schools in Japan. Kodokans, so let's call them missionaries. It's a little unfair to say that the purpose they left Japan was to teach judo, but maybe a secondary purpose. But they're teaching around the world, and some of these Japanese end up in Brazil, and some of these Japanese go on to teach to Brazilians, a number of Brazilians, in fact, all over the country, really not. But what the famous story, the story that became known and many people credit with being the birthplace of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu would be Belém do Pará. But there's a lot of question marks as far as who they taught and for how long, and there's a lot of, most of it just comes down to oral tradition, which in historical terms you have to be careful because, and when it comes to oral tradition, it's not the most popular position, but people lie, people distort, they omit, they tend to favor their friends and family members and students. And, so that people it's very common. I do this, you do this. Everyone has done this. We distort the narrative to suit our own needs, whether those needs are emotional, financial, political, we do these things. This is a normal act of human behavior to, distort the narrative to suit our needs. And there's a lot of that going on. So that's one of the purposes of this documentary, to try to correct that. And then no great revelations. If you're somewhat familiar with the history of jiu-jitsu, it's mostly accurate, but there's a lot of, I don't like to use the word rewrite. Maybe the word complete would be a better definition of what we're trying to do. Just make it more accurate and complete. And me personally, I think the story is far more interesting than what has been told to us throughout oral tradition and the official narrative, let's call it that. I think what actually happened according to the sources, the story we are able to tell is far more interesting than what we've heard so far.
Yeah. So how much of this is going around, like getting interviews where you largely know what the person is going to say versus going to interviews to learn something and investigate what the history is?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're just some surprises. Like the problem with interviewing, I've had know. I mean, I've given plenty of interviews throughout my career, but like I've never interviewed someone. So difficulty we found is that a lot of times people would tell you what they think you want to hear, and we're trying to get the truth out of them. We're trying to get an accurate account. And there are a lot of times they're just saying what they think you want to hear because I want to make sure they use this information. So I got to say the right things. And the biggest difficulty is actually trying to get them to be natural and almost forget that they're being interviewed. And it's not an easy thing to do. And we got better at, with time we improved, like things got better and better, but it's not an easy task. And there's a thing too, like once again, like people lie in the store. Like sometimes there were people saying things and we knew for a fact that they were lying, maybe not willingly, they just didn't know. Like maybe willingly, maybe not. They just didn't. They were ignorant of the story. They thought they knew, but they were saying something that we knew wasn't true. So we have to edit them out. So how do we know when they're telling the truth and when they're not? Well, I brought some historians on board, people who I consider to be the biggest experts in the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and people have been studying this for years, and people that have published academic work on it. So like serious people that were able to correct them when necessary. When it was a gray area, if it's relevant, we'll put it in there and let people decide. If it's irrelevant, we're going to cut it out of the film. And those are the decisions that I, as executive producer, I'm constantly making these decisions, right? What goes in and what doesn't, what's controversial but meaningful, and controversial and meaningless. And if it's true, it goes on there. If it's not true, we cut it out immediately. The historians were generally speaking more accurate, but even so, like sometimes there's controversy amongst historians. Like they disagree, like they have access to the exact same data, but they come up with different conclusions. So once again, like I make the decision of, what's if it's going to be A or B. My criteria tends to be like if it's meaningful, like I said, I'm going to leave it in gray. If it's meaningless, there's no point of talking about something that doesn't really affect the overall story. So. But it's been fun. It's been quite an experience, and it's been it's like learning a new skill set from scratch. And I know, to me, that's the best part. More than the final product, I think I've enjoyed the journey.
Yeah, that's. I think a lot of times we feel the same thing about jiu-jitsu. You enjoy the journey, not just the latest accomplishment that you have. If you were to look at a family tree of martial arts, and you have jiu-jitsu or Brazilian jiu-jitsu, whichever one you want to talk about, where does that branch off from somewhere else? And when did that really happen?
It's very difficult to pinpoint because it like when you say this is the beginning, it's really arbitrary because it's a process. Like think of in terms of evolution. There's no day or event that changes something. Think about something like the history of the United States. Like, when did it begin, if I ask you that question? And you can say 1776. Like, really? I mean, is that the day? Like, you can't – we come up with these arbitrary numbers and dates and names, but the truth is history is a process, and it's a slow process, and it's a gradual change. Like we are. Like, well, if I were to define you as a person, like you might be able to single out, some important events, like, the day you got married or the day you got your black belt or the first day in school or whatever, some symbolic dates for you. But if I were to describe you as a person, you would have to understand the process. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when it comes to, and we like to things, people want that cut and dry answer, that black and white linear, like a tree, like you said. And it's more like, I view history more as a bush than a tree. That's how I view it. It's very entangled. It's up, down, left, right, center. It intermixes with all these other events, and it makes it complex. And the reason why history is such a complex theme to study, because you can't quantify it the way we would like to quantify something like mathematics, which is very linear, straightforward. There's no disputing that 2 + 2 = 4. With history, there's lots of that. I would like to give you a tree. But if I give you a tree, I'd be being unfair with a lot of people.
Yeah.
With that being said, we have to some extent, we have to start giving some names. I'll leave it at this. As far as history of jiu-jitsu goes, there's a lot of people missing. A lot of people that are given a lot of credit that didn't do that much. Like some people got blown way out of proportion, in my opinion. One of them was Mitsui Maeda. Like Mitsui Maeda got put on this pedestal like he was this. And the truth is, like, he didn't even care that much about jiu-jitsu when he was in Brazil. At least that's what you get from the sources. He's more involved in politics. He's more worried about Japanese immigration than he is about, he's from the accounts we get through the sources of the time, he was barely teaching. And jiu-jitsu was more something he had done in his youth. And when he goes to Brazil, he's pretty much retired. Mostly some fake fights here and there. Like he was probably the most. He probably got the ball rolling when it came to fake fights. Like he was very much into a fake fight, and we can understand why he did what he did. That's how you make your money. You put on a real fight. It was people aren't interested in watching that. But like his role got blown way out of proportion, and some people could even question, does he even belong in the tree? Like it's questionable. Like does he even he normally when you talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he gets put first in that lineage, right? He is the trunk. But if you really look at things and you try to rid yourself of all mythology, and you just look at what actually happened, you could even question if he even belongs in the tree. Okay, you could almost make him a marginal character, because even though he was one of the first to introduce judo in Brazil, or he went back and forth between the terms judo and jiu-jitsu, but he still didn't really do that much. Like in the grand scheme of things, a list of like 100 people that actually done more. They just weren't famous. And you see where popularity kind of trumps, accomplishment. Like this is one of those things where the person who does a lot doesn't get remembered because he doesn't have a marketing machine behind him. But Maeda was famous. He was referred to in the press as the world champion. And he probably was very good and skilled. But when he's in Brazil, in Belém do Pará specifically, he's pretty much retired. People would challenge him. He'd have him fight his students. Like, no, you fight one of my students. And from the accounts we get, it looked like he was barely teaching. He was kind of the guy that got the ball rolling, maybe taught a few classes. He had some prominent students that took the lead role teaching for him, and they kind of carried on. But, like, he's not a very present character.
You talk about the evolution of it. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when it started, those concepts started to be introduced to Brazil, what changed about it to make it differently? Was it like a change of culture? Was it a change of the rules of a sport you were playing, or was it training environments? Were they training differently? What was like a driving factor?
Yeah, this is a very theoretical question. It's difficult to answer it objectively. Well, I'll give you my opinion. Some people might disagree. I'll give you my approach, because it's not something, because now you're talking about like why did it move in this direction, that direction. So I can give you some of my ideas, but like some historians may disagree. What I believe happened was, first of all, Kodokan Olympic judo changed. When Maeda was teaching in Brazil, is what he took from when he left Japan. Right. So over time, over the years, like Kodokan became more and more sport oriented, and they were trying. They formatted their art into an Olympic format, so it became a sport. It was a transition from less towards the martial art end of the spectrum, more towards the sport end of the spectrum. Whereas in Brazil, I think it was almost like fossilized for a time, like it didn't keep up with the evolution of judo. Later, many Japanese and many Brazilians, they were absorbed by judo. Or there's a little niche, and this is where my opinion, the Gracie family deserves a lot of credit for, is that they were practicing something that wasn't quite Kodokan judo anymore, because the rules. Kodokan banned shoulder locks, they banned foot locks, they banned all sorts of techniques that they saw were not suitable for a sport format, whereas in Brazil they kept them alive. They were still practicing them. The whole idea that Brazilians revolutionized the ground game is nonsense. It's just simply not true. The Japanese were light years ahead of Brazilians. This is my opinion. Until the 90s. Up to the 90s, the Japanese were still ahead of Brazilians. It was only after, my opinion, the inception of IBJJF, the Brazilians really took off. That was a real revolution, a technical revolution in Brazil. And the thing is, Brazilians became very, the ground was very much part of their practice for as long as they were training. Whereas in Japan, because they weeded out the ground, it became less ground oriented. Now, in order to keep something that distinguished themselves from the judo practiced by the Japanese, what Brazilians were doing is, okay, we're going to not only call it something else. So they took as the Japanese started using the name judo more and less jiu-jitsu, the Brazilians did the opposite. When I'm talking about Brazilians, I'm talking specifically like the Gracie family and their circles. They start using more jiu-jitsu. And because they couldn't quite agree on the rules, they agreed that they were different. Couldn't agree on what kind of rules are we going to compete under. So, the Japanese were like, well, we're going to go, when I say Japanese, well, many Brazilians too, I'm talking about like more the judo side. They're going, okay, these are the official rules, and the Gracie clan, they're going, no, these are the rules. This is how we're going to compete, and because they couldn't agree on the rules, they kind of drifted in different directions. So, what we call Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu today became more ground oriented, right? Whereas what we call judo became more stand up oriented. Like that's when you can see it's a slow, gradual split, but you can see even like through the 60s and 70s, like many people in Brazil, they taught judo and jiu-jitsu. Like that's how many of these guys were still teaching both, but slowly but surely, judo absorbed a lot of what, a lot of these academies that were teaching a more ground oriented game. They became more closer to the Olympic style because it was more prestigious. Like what we call Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu almost died in some ways because it just wasn't being practiced by a lot of people. Judo really took over. It was the trendy martial art of the time, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it was almost dead before it was even born. And when I say born, I mean really as, maybe born is not the right word, maybe like as an extension of Kodokan Judo. It was an aspect of Kodokan Judo that was kept alive and evolved in a different direction because of the rivalry mainly between Brazilians and Japanese, and they couldn't quite agree on the rules. And the Gracie ditch, they just didn't want to be absorbed by judo. They would not, we don't like those rules because it didn't suit them. They couldn't keep up with the Japanese primarily. So let's go on the ground because on the ground we can hang. All right. I have another suspicion. This is my personal hypothesis, is why Brazilians got so ground oriented when it came to their judo or jiu-jitsu is I think it has to do with the infrastructure in Brazil. It's very difficult to practice jiu-jitsu. I mean, if you get small mat area, like how many people can you fit on the mats? You can only fit so many people. Now, if you go to like any university in the United States, you look at their wrestling mats, they're huge. If you look at judo mats in Japan, they're huge. Whereas in Brazil, especially something like jiu-jitsu, didn't have any government funding. You were teaching in your garage. You were teaching in your living room. You were teaching very small because there's no money behind it. As judo grew and it became absorbed, right, by most of the practitioners, and once it becomes an Olympic sport, now you're seeing not only is it more prestigious, more people want to train it. That means there are more funds, but there's also to some extent there's government support to that as well. So you end up with bigger mat areas, which explains why they're able to stand up most of the time. Whereas the guys who are doing what we call Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they're stuck in very small, little tight spaces. Very difficult to practice in a tight space. So develop the art of knee wrestling, and that's that you start on your knees, and that could be an explanation why Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu became so ground oriented. But it might be a technical probably a combination of the two, but a technical strategical preference because Brazilians just couldn't hang with the Japanese on their feet, so they just specialize on the ground and maybe fight for a draw. And a draw is not a bad. If you're going against someone who's better than you, a draw is not a bad result.
Yeah, and so the idea that let me make sure I understand this correctly. The idea that you don't have enough space, well, it takes X amount of square feet to train on the ground, like current day jiu-jitsu style, and it takes X plus another number to train like a judo style. Like it takes more space to train.
Absolutely. If you have just go to your own gym when you train. If you start people standing, how many people can you fit in there? Like 3 groups, maybe. Yeah, exactly. If you put them on their knees, you could probably double that number.
Yeah, quite easily.
Yeah,
and the quality of the mats could be lower as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to exactly. You can train literally on carpet. It might suck, but you could probably do it. Whereas and judo wrestling is the same, requires more space. So if you look at the very first Gracie Academy, or technically the second, but the one in Marquês de Abrantes, it's a little bit bigger than a bathroom. Like I was there, we were there, we filmed there. It's a little bit bigger than a bathroom. Like I'm looking at that space and I'm going, you can barely get 2 people rolling in here. Like it's so small. But that's what they had to work with. They probably have the funds to rent a bigger space, and they worked with what they had. But I think that played a role. I'm not saying that's the only reason or the main reason, but I think something like that might have played a role. When you can contrast it with like wrestling mats in the American University or judo mats in Japan, like there's a screaming difference.
Yeah, and then just like environment will ultimately shape the way. Things
absolutely. The environment, the rules, these are the things that are going to shape the direction of the sport. You do it enough on the ground, guess what? You get better on the ground. If you don't do it standing, guess what? You suck at it. And I think that right there, to some extent at least, dictated the direction that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu took. Granted, it was very small. Like, Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil was never big. I think some people under the impression it was always like very popular. It never was. Believe me, I grew up in Brazil. Like, I didn't even no idea what it was until I saw Royce Gracie in the UFC. That's when I first heard of Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil, and that's true for most people. Outside of maybe Rio de Janeiro and Manaus, most people never even heard of it, or they wouldn't be able to tell the difference between Jiu-Jitsu and Kung Fu. It's just something that they didn't know much about.
Yeah, it's not football.
It became popular. Yeah, it was very niche. It was very specific. It really grew after the UFC and after after CBJJ or IBJJF was born. That's when Jiu-Jitsu really started taking off as a mass sport with thousands, millions of practitioners.
Why this is going to be most probably a guess, but early jiu-jitsu, why did people train? What was the main drive behind training? Similar
reasons as today. Like, it wasn't so different. I was just looking at some of the ads of the Gracie Academy back in the day, and they're pushing for anti-bullying. Like, if your kid is getting beat up at school, bring him over to the gym and we'll teach him how to defend himself. It wasn't so different from marketing tactics today. There was a lot of the little guy can beat the big guy with good technique. So, like, some of the marketing tactics they go way back. What else? I think sports, the concept of sport was being born early in the 20th century. The Olympics is being organized. Like, people are more aware of the sport as an endeavor in itself, whereas before, people weren't working out; they were working in the field. There was the concept of working out and exercising is somewhat new. It existed in ancient times, but in Europe and the Americas, it's somewhat of a new concept. So it came along with that. Another interesting thing is that, Jiu-Jitsu really started in the circus. A lot of people don't know this, but the first demonstrations of Jiu-Jitsu, the first Jiu-Jitsu matches, whether they were fixed or not, I have my doubts, probably most of them fixed, were actually in circuses. But the public is being introduced to the concept of sport and self-defense. And similar reasons as today, less popularity. People don't know what a black belt was. It meant absolutely nothing. And black belt's something that came on later on that you weren't exposed to Hollywood movies. And I think that much of our martial arts education essentially comes from movies. That's where we were first educated with martial arts, or maybe cartoons and comic books and whatever. But then there was none of that. So the public was still being educated. It was something exotic. That's how they viewed the gi as something exotic. Anything Oriental was exotic. They knew very little about the East. Well, we still do, but even then, even less so. So you're practicing something that is, so far removed and exotic, and maybe there's a lot of curiosity. I can see people being curious about it. The Russo-Japanese War certainly played a role there, like tiny Japan defeating large Russia, and a lot of these practitioners, when they were traveling through the world, they were using that as a marketing tool to sell their art to the world. Look, little Japan beat the big Russia because of its technique, and jiu-jitsu played a huge part in that. So they're using that as a marketing tool as well. So there's this growing curiosity in the West about what the Japanese were doing in their school of education, and much of this curiosity could be credited to martial arts, which, even its practice in Japan then, when it was spread around, in the West early in the 20th century, might have been exaggerated. I might suspicion there weren't that many practitioners. I wouldn't be able to give you numbers, but I think martial arts were growing in Japan around that time too, because everything that was considered pre-Meiji was something that was ancient and almost frowned upon. Like, they were trying to modernize, and that's perhaps the brilliance of Kano is modernizing something that was ancient and making it palatable to a public that wanted to leave behind an ancient past, a distant past that they viewed as being backwards.
You mentioned that jiu-jitsu was done at a circus, and I could picture like the strong man at the circus bending iron bars. I could picture a bearded lady, as much as that sounds great to picture.
Exactly.
What did they do for jiu-jitsu? Yeah. What was being done?
Demonstrations, self-defense demonstrations. They grab someone from the public, take them down and finish them. I'll challenge anyone. It was part of the circus show. It was an act. Essentially, how they referred to practitioners? They didn't call them. It's not unusual for you to find this. You didn't call them fighters. You didn't call them jiu-jitsu practitioners. You called them acrobats. That's how they referred to some of these guys. And it wasn't just jiu-jitsu, incidentally. Greco-Roman was in Brazil prior to jiu-jitsu. You know, catch wrestling was part of the same wave. Catch wrestling played a huge role in the development of jiu-jitsu in Brazil. A lot of people don't know this. Maybe somebody may not like this, but I think catch wrestling was a factor in the development of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Even the names, like you can see in Brazil, like some of the names they use, they don't call the armbar Jujigatami. They don't call it chave de braço. They call it arm lock. You know, a knee bar is leg lock. They call the Kimura Americana. Like this is straight out from catch wrestling, and this is what they still call it in Brazil, in Brazilian jiu-jitsu circles in Brazil. So there's a lot of that going on. But yeah, the circles early on. It played a role in the development of jiu-jitsu. Like you know, Carlos's first official matches, whether they were fake or not, like is very controversial, but they were inside a circus.
You mentioned catch wrestling. What happened to that? What happened to it, I guess, compared to jiu-jitsu, and why did one take off so well and the other one is struggling?
I'm not sure why that happened. Like it'd be an interesting topic, but it never really caught on. Like catch wrestling was something that it actually evolved into luta livre. Luta livre is basically a product of these Vale Tudo matches, the rivalry between, you know, Brazilians and the judokas, and the influence of the catch wrestlers. And luta livre will be an extension of catch wrestling in a way. I guess you could say that. But it's difficult to say. I think there's something about I think something about even the gi, the belts, like these things add credibility to something. There's something about the like even like school owners today, if you ask them which one is more successful, the gi or the no gi program, and it's unanimous, they all say gi program. There's something, I think it adds the element of the uniform might have played a role, just a suspicion of mine. I wouldn't be able to give you exact reasons why catch wrestling never took off. They probably never got organized into a federation, or they did it too late. Sometimes it's just missing that person that puts it together, has the right connections, teaches the right people. That's one thing the Gracies were very smart about. They always taught the right people. When I mean right people, I mean wealthy people. It was probably necessary at the time to make it try to survive in the midst of, you know, judo and its popularity. So they were teaching diplomats and ambassadors and, you know, businessmen, bankers. They were, you know, they're teaching the wealthy, influential crowd, which helped them be part of the press. Like they were constantly in the press. Why? Because they had the right connections. Where if you're teaching in the slums of Rio de Janeiro, let's say, you're probably not going to get good connections to help you, you know, start a federation or get sponsors or get funding. And this might have played a role as well. And I think catch wrestling ultimately always was, and maybe to some extent even today, is still associated with pro wrestling. There's then even more than now maybe. And I think that might have played a role as well. Whereas jiu-jitsu was equally involved, by the way. I make no mistake, Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioners were all involved, like with few exceptions, were not involved in these fake fights. And yeah, you know, we shouldn't be finger pointing when it comes to this, but these fake fights might have played a role in giving room and financial aid to keep the sport alive. You know, we're going to talk a little about this in the documentary, but like I think that the fake fighting was an element in the survival of BJJ at a time where there were no means for these guys to make money, and they probably would have gone to get a normal job had they not, you know, been able to make some money from fighting. Because you put on a real jiu-jitsu match to a lay pub audience, even today, people are looking at it going, "What the hell is going on?" Like imagine then when people are even less educated. So it was certainly something difficult to sell.
Yeah, and that's I think the idea of telling a story behind jiu-jitsu is going to be a lot more friendly to a non-jiu-jitsu audience because people like stories, and the fact that it's about jiu-jitsu is great, but they're coming in to see an interesting story, and there's going to be some drama and some, you know, questions about what's happening and that sort of thing. But you know, a good documentary about a sport I don't really know of, I'll still like that because I get to know people and I get to see how the story unfolds, and you don't have to be a fan of jiu-jitsu to enjoy a documentary like this.
Yeah, that's the goal. The goal is to make it something that is watchable for all audiences, even if you know a lot about the history of jiu-jitsu or if you know nothing. And it's kind of like teaching a seminar. And I bump into this problem all the time when I teach. You have white belts who've been training for 3 weeks, and then you have black belts who've been training as long as you have. And I'm teaching a seminar. What do I teach? You see my problem?
Yeah.
Because you have specialists and you have – how do you teach something that makes everyone happy? It is extremely difficult. But, you know, with seminars, I kind of got it down. I know what to do. I know how to make everyone happy. I've been doing it for so long. Documentary, like it's first and might be my last too. I don't know. but like we have to get it right. Like, how do we tell? Because there are people that have been studying this. Like, there are like, maybe amateur historians that know a lot about this story, and they're going to be judging us every second along the way. And they want to see something that's very educational and informative. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have like your grandma who's doesn't even know what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is, but she'll sit down and watch a documentary with you maybe. We want to make sure that she understands what's going on. And it's very difficult because the more you dilute it, the less educational it is. My ultimate goal is to make it archival. And what I mean by that is we had a golden opportunity that we actually sit down with the very last generation of people who experienced this evolution. They were there. They were part of it. They're all in their late 80s, early 90s. They're not going to be around for much longer. If someone tries to redo this documentary 10 years from now, I don't think they're going to be able to do it. Because they're not going to have any eyewitnesses. They're going to have only sources, only historians. So we were fortunate enough to do it at a time where not only do we have access to all these grandmasters that are still alive, that witnessed firsthand this evolution, but we also had access to all the leading historians in the field. So that right there gives us an edge. But ultimately, our goal is to make it archival. We want it to be something that people reference 50 years from now. If 50 years from now, I believe BJJ will be much bigger than it is today. People want to learn about how Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu developed. How did it evolve? They're going to watch this documentary. Unless you want to read, 3,000 pages of academic work, you're going to watch a 90-minute documentary, which I think is going to be most people. And so we have that responsibility. But to me, I really want to make it something archival. So I think we're probably going to lean towards the information side. Because if we do something that's only leaning towards a lay audience and just only worried about entertaining, only worried about what someone that's never trained jiu-jitsu before wants to be introduced to jiu-jitsu, if we lean towards that end of the spectrum, what's going to happen is it will not be referenced in the future. It will not be something archival. It will not be something remembered 50 years from now. So unless we tell a story in the most accurate way possible, and that means delivering a lot of information, it's not going to be something remembered in the future. And that's our ultimate goal. We want it to be that movie that no one is able to redo ever again.
Yeah, because it's done so well, and it tells the details, and it's really, like you said, the last that chapter's closing, and you've been able to go talk to somebody and get the story from them.
We were probably the last people to interview some of these grandmasters. They're in their 90s. They're not going to be around very long. So we were. I think this all happened at the right time, and I have to be thankful here. I think what really got the ball rolling was the digitalization of files in the Brazilian National Library in 2013. Up to 2013, I believe it's 2013. Don't quote me on it. I'm almost positive it was, but it was recent. This is quite recent. And then everyone started researching because we had access to all these newspaper articles that we thought were gone. Now we have access to them, right? And then the book that went on to inspire the documentary film, it's called Choque by Roberto Pedreira. Marcial Serrano's books, and they're only in Portuguese. Pedreira's books are available in English on Amazon. And those books went on to inspire me and go, okay, this story needs to be told. We want to tell it in a film format because, truth be told, no one's going to read these books. Some people will, but you have to be like a history nerd to read, like I said, 3,000 pages of academic work. It's heavy read. It's not for everyone. So some people are going to look at it. They're going to look at the size of the books and they're going to go, no way, I'm not even going to touch it. Especially my generation, people just don't read. They like we discussed earlier, they won't even watch a 5-minute video on YouTube. You have to give them something that's digestible, right? To an audience that is bombarded with information 24 hours a day. So that's kind of where we come in. We came in at the right time, and had this happen, 10 years from now, this movie, would be possible, but only with historians. We probably have no eyewitnesses, left.
Why are you calling it closed guard? Is there something about that position in particular?
A few reasons. I think closed. You're the first person to ask that question, by the way. We wanted a short name. I didn't want to the Origins of Jiu-Jitsu as a subtitle, but closed guard is the name, and something that it was referenced Jiu-Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu directly. It's a specific position of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It makes it sets it apart from other grappling arts. If you look at other grappling arts, you can maybe say judo is an exception because they do play guard, but not for very long, and it's not very. Sport judo became very, top takedown oriented. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu really is exceptional out of all the grappling arts because it actually emphasizes being on your back a lot. So that's one reason. So it's very specific. But also, it was the position that allowed many of the Brazilians to survive against the Japanese when they were competing against each other. So Helio Gracie goes with Yasuichi Ono or Kimura or Kato. If he decides to stand up with them, he's going to lose. He knows it. So he gets taken down. What does he do? He puts him in closed guard. Now he's got a shot. Not only do the guys have a hard time opening his closed guard and passing, but he's got a shot at fighting back. So what is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu doing with judo? It's fighting back. It's our shot at survival with staying what? Staying closed, right? So it's symbolic. It's a closed game. It's a closed story too. The story was, it only opened. When did it open? It opened after the digitalization of the files of the Brazilian National Library. So it's a name that has like a lot of meanings, and I thought it was the ideal name. I thought of it. I remember where I was when I thought of it. I was like, that's the perfect name for the documentary, because it was something that was closed, but we were trying to open it up. Right, we're trying to make the story available to the public, and so it's a loaded name, I guess.
The way it sounds like you're describing it, the actual closed guard position. I mean, the name has a lot behind it, but the position itself is something that really makes Jiu-Jitsu unique, or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu unique. Yes,
it makes it unique, and once again, like, it allowed Brazilians to hang with the Japanese. Otherwise, they would have gotten creamed. If the Brazilians decided to fight the Japanese and Japanese rules, judo rules, they would get murdered. Like, they would, like, none of these guys would have survived. Brazilians would have not won a single match. But if we go to the ground and there are no points, and I am able to close the guard and keep you there for as long as I can, and you can't pass, maybe I can't finish, it's a draw. Well, it's a draw, that means it was close. Well, not necessarily. Sometimes you can smash, but because you didn't get finished, you have a marketing tool now. At least, like, you can, and this is one thing you got to give the Gracie family a lot of credit for. Like, they were brilliant in marketing. Like, they were way ahead of the game. Like, when you look at, like, the match with Kimura, well, Helio lost. Like, he clearly lost, and it wasn't close. From all accounts, it was not a close match either. But when you hear these accounts of what, it almost sounds like he won. Like, they made it a victory. They called it a moral victory. So they're very good at that. And I think that the position closed guard played a role in allowing some of this marking to be possible. And so that's, the name is symbolic on a number of different levels.
Yeah. If somebody is watching, and just because it has a bigger spectator base, MMA, and they watch somebody either working from the guard and they land a triangle and they finish the fight, and they ask themselves, what is that person, what happened there, and why did that come from Brazil? Would this documentary be a good tool to go figure out just the basic question?
Yes, but one thing, for example, you mentioned the triangle. The triangle is one of the positions we talk about. The triangle was not known in Brazil until, like, some people are saying like 70s, some people 80s. I remember watching it. I was trying to get this footage. I couldn't get a hold of it. I'd still like to get it, but Marcelo Bering teaching a seminar in São Paulo in the early 90s. And he goes like this: I'm going to teach you guys a position now. It's a new position we've been working on in Rio. It's called the triangle. Just to give an idea of where Brazilians were, right? How far behind judo they were on the ground, technically. This whole thing about them being like light years ahead, like, it's good marketing tool, but I just can't see it being true. I just can't see it being true. Like, when you hear, like, the guys from this generation describe what they were doing, when you watch videos or you look at pictures, it looks very primitive. And this is not an attack on anyone. Absolutely not. They were standing on the shoulders of giants. If I'm able to have a job today or be here right now talking about this documentary film, it's because of them. So this is not an attack on them. But we have to be realistic when we talk about these things. To say, like, oh, Brazilians invented the ground, they revolutionized the ground game. Well, that's not true. They kept alive, and then they, over time, it evolved. It got better in Brazil, but it's almost like Japan went backwards on the ground. But if you look at what the Japanese were doing early in the 20th century, throughout the 40s, 50s, primarily through, Kosen Judo stayed alive in Japan, but it became something very niche. But technically, they were way ahead of Brazilians. These guys were doing De La Riva. You've seen them. You can find them doing berimbolos, or like a crude form of a berimbolo, but it's there. You can recognize it. X-guard, like, these guys I've seen pictures of or drawings of footlock from 50-50 from 1904. So to say that the Brazilians were the first ones to do it, no, that's simply not true. Did they invent it? You can say they invented, because inventions, they occur in different places at different times. the wheel wasn't just invented in the Fertile Crescent. It was invented most likely in China. We know the Aztecs used it as well. So my point is, the same invention can occur in multiple different places at different times.
Yeah.
So are Brazilians credited for inventing ground game? You could say that in some ways, yes. Or not inventing, but like bettering it, improving on it, yes. Did they do it first? No, the Japanese were, they were quite sophisticated, in comparison where the Brazilians were at the time. This is going to change after IBJJF, my opinion. After IBJJF, then Brazilians, they're a lot of years ahead of everyone, because that's when the competitions become more organized and they start reaching to a broader audience. And you're not just talking about 10 academies anymore. You're talking about 10,000 academies. So that right there, the competition really raised the bar, and it turned jiu-jitsu essentially into an arms race. And that's when you see the quick evolution of the art. But up to then, I just don't see jiu-jitsu as being something sophisticated. When you can watch these guys rolling around the 80s. Don't take my word for it. Watch it. And try to find anything there that you wouldn't teach in your white belt class. And I'm not saying they're not good at jiu-jitsu. You can have white belt jiu-jitsu and be phenomenal. Look at Roger Gracie, arguably the best ever. And when you look at what he's doing, it's white belt jiu-jitsu. What do I mean by that? It's all very simple. It's all very straightforward. So you can have basic jiu-jitsu and be the best in the world. That's not what I'm saying. But when you look at the technical development that we're watching in the 80s and early 90s, it's nothing compared to what we see today. So I think that's an element that a lot of people are in denial about, and hopefully the documentary will be able to correct that. We're going to contrast what was going on in Japan at the time with what Brazilians were doing, just to kind of get rid of the myth that Brazilians revolutionized the ground. Because if they did it, if you want to say Brazilians revolutionized the ground, okay, but they did it way after the Japanese.
It's a documentary on people, training techniques, training methods, history of the competition, how that shaped it. It's you have to take a whole like a bird's eye view of everything to kind of try to figure out what's happening and what's different about it. And
yes, and like I said, history is not linear. Yeah. You're gonna get a historian who's gonna you're gonna interpret an event like something like the French Revolution, whatever. Like you can get 10 historians. They're going to agree on a lot, and they're going to disagree on some things. And that's kind of what, it's similar. Like historians don't agree on everything. I think I'm fortunate enough to be assisted by some of the guys who I consider to be, the most knowledgeable guys on the topic in the field. And, we found a lot of middle ground, and we're less worried about making this guy happy or this guy unhappy. And I'm not concerned with making friends or making enemies. I just want to tell an accurate account, as accurate as possible. It's not a political endeavor on my end. It's more passion for history and for the truth, and that's what we're trying to get at.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, where is the funding coming from? Something like this?
Well, we got the funding from Mayrbek Kasiev and Zaurbek Kasiev from their ACB owners, the Absolute Championship Recruit. And I presented them the idea, and they fell in love with it. And they didn't know that much about the history of jiu-jitsu, but I remember sitting down with Mayrbek, and halfway through the presentation, he said, no, I love the idea. I didn't even finish it. He goes no, how much do you need? And they're very excited about it, And one reason why, because we got the funding we wanted, because originally we had like a smaller budget and a larger budget. We got the larger budget, means that we were able to expand on the original production. So which is why it's taken longer than expected, because we're able to do more. So it's going to, because we have to assume that, at some point we were going to crowdfund too. The plan was to crowdfund, and we know how difficult that is. So, but we really wanted to tell the story, but we knew that the story wasn't going to be told right if we had limited funds, and we wanted to have the right amount of money to do it right, because we knew we had the potential to do something archival. And if it's something archival, I think that any money that's spent on put on a good quality film is definitely worth it. The way I see this is for future generations, and we have the Kasiev to thank for this. They've been very generous and very supportive, and they've been great for jiu-jitsu. So thanks to them.
Yeah, and it really gives you the ability to tell the story as honestly as you can, and with the information you've gathered, just present it, and not have to worry about.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if Jorge and Gracie had funded me, how would you not be supporting? Because you would want us to tell a story according to what he would like it to be. Or for example, this goes across the board. So the team had to be everything from the investor to, myself and the rest of the team, the historians. We needed people that were impartial and didn't have a dog in the fight. And that's where we're at. Like, for example, there are a lot of people that are, following the documentary, they think that we're going to be praising them and putting them on pedestals. And we're going to lay down some facts that they may not like. They thought, oh, this is going to be our great moment. Finally, people are going to tell our story, and they may be disappointed because, some of the things that we're going to expose may not make them happy. But like I said, this is not a political endeavor. This is a historical one, and I think the purpose of a historian is to try to be as honest as possible and, not have a dog in the fight. And if that hurts your own case and your own lineage, let's say, then so be it. But ultimately, to me, good quality comes from, putting something together that is difficult to speak of historical truths, but something that gets close to it. And that's our goal. And by doing so, making it archival and something that people are going to reference and remember in the future.
Really interested in this. Where can somebody, when it comes out, where are you trying to get it to be available?
We don't know yet. What we do know is we're going to have some marketing behind it. Like, we have a budget for marketing too. So we're going to hear about it. If you're on social media, if you're in jiu-jitsu circles, you are going to hear about it. This is something that it's very important to us, because our goal is to get every jiu-jitsu practitioner on the planet to watch this. That's a lot of people. If everyone's going to watch it, we don't know, but if you train jiu-jitsu, even if you hate history, you watch a documentary about the art you love. There's a lot of people that love jiu-jitsu, and so we feel like we have a large audience. For that, we need a network to get that make that movie available to the public. We don't know. We're talking to a few different people. We have a few different options on the table, but we don't know that yet. But it's a decision we have to make somewhat soon, except because the product's not finished. So no one's going to say, oh, I'm going to buy this documentary or to distribute this documentary or I'll stream this documentary if they have no idea what it is. So ideally we'd have to finish it first, but I'd like to have it finished and released soon after. So we're running short on time, and it's just a lot of work. This has been one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And there's a lot that can go wrong, and it's very difficult to, like I said earlier, write something that it pleases everyone. When I think about it, your own gym where you train, your instructor probably leans towards these techniques versus those techniques. It's very difficult to teach a program that makes everyone happy, because some people like De La Hiva, some people like passing, some people like takedowns, some people like leg locks. And I have the same problems when I teach. How do you make everyone happy? And it's not an easy thing to do. And with this movie, I guess I lean towards not trying to make people happy. That's kind of where I lean. I just want to educate them in the most literal sense of the word. I'm trying to teach them something new. And if they like it, they do. If they don't, they don't. But as long as they walk away from that with I have a better understanding of how Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu developed, then I feel it's mission accomplished. That's the ultimate goal.
You think about a lot of different martial arts, and they have, I think most of them have more formal belt testing than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu does. But I wouldn't be shocked if someday in the future somebody said, yeah, you're going to test for your blue belt, know these set of techniques and be ready to take a quiz about this documentary. And just to force some history into somebody.
I thought about that, adding, because I do belt tests, and with our association, we belt test, and we don't hand belts. You have to earn your spot on the belt test. Once you earn your spot on the belt test, you meet the technical criteria, you meet the physical and emotional criteria, which is the 1 hour rolling nonstop. So there are criteria you have to meet to get once you earn your spot on the belt test. But I actually thought about including some historical questions, but it's very difficult to write those questions because they're all so subjective. And you can maybe, some questions can be objective, but it's not easy. But yeah, maybe we can insert that. I spoke to IBJJF before about maybe teaching a history course on IBJJF referee courses. So for you to get your black belt certification, you not only do a CPR course, you need to do your rules course, but you also need a course on the history of Jiu-Jitsu. And that was a suggestion. They were interested. They were open to hearing it and maybe discussing, what would be taught. And it's a long story. Depends. You can focus on many different narratives. It's not something you can do in an hour. Put it like that.
I got a couple questions from some listeners and Patreon supporters, just general jiu-jitsu stuff. Paul wants to know your thoughts about training for competition, and he's kind of looking at two different schools of thought. One of them, you train a long time and you train very deliberately and at a slower pace. And the other one's basically every day you train like you're competing, you train really hard. Which camp do you kind of fall into?
That's a good question. Throughout my career, I've always fall towards the second camp, like train balls to the wall, like train like you're competing. And I think that you still need hard rounds. I'd like to get at least a couple hard rounds in every day, like competition rounds. But the problem is if you go like that the whole time, A, the injury ratio is going to be a lot higher. B, you're going to be exhausted for the next day. You may not be able to recover for the second session if you do 2 a day, or depending on your age, even for the next day. And there's less, because you exhaust yourself in a shorter period of time, you get less technique in. So one thing you could do is less than intense rounds at 70%, which requires a good training partner. It's not always easy. I have a hard time doing that because with me and some of my better students, like, it escalates very quickly. It turns into a competition in about 20 seconds. But the advantage of going long rounds, or longer breaks, is that you get more time in. So instead of having 1 hour of intensity, you might be able to get 2-3 hours of intensity, even if it's not as intense. So one thing, like, I always give my students breaks. A lot of people don't like, long breaks, you're letting them rest. I'm like, I want them rested, because if they're rested, they come out They come out fresh, and they can have like a full quality-oriented round again. So I'm not worried about exhausting my guys the whole time unless there's a competition coming up. If you're getting ready for a competition, and obviously your mindset changes, being in peak shape is fundamental now. But for learning purposes, I would rather have slower pace, long rounds. This is still competitive. You're not letting, but it's not. You're not exhausting yourself, in 20 minutes and then you're done for your day. You're more concerned about like working on your technique, but even in those days, I'd still like to get a couple hard rounds in. If you only flow roll, what happens is when you get used to training like that, when you compete, you walk in there, in slow gear because you're not used to competing out, training at a fast pace, and you have to train at a fast pace. But you also need the slower rounds to work on your technique. So long story short, I'll try to give you an objective answer. Both. You want both. I lean towards harder rounds, towards competition, and throughout the rest of the year, slower paced rounds with some intense rounds in there as well, in order to give yourself time to learn the technique. Do
you see like a lot of value for intense positional round versus just go and start from wherever?
No, I like positional for learning purposes. For competition purposes, you might want to focus on the things you're good at. But the problem with only focus on things you good at, you end up with a lot of blind spots.
Yeah,
and then you got to find a guy that's got your kryptonite. Now you're gonna have a hard time beating that guy, and that's gonna happen. It happens to everyone. As an instructor, I teach very what I call democratic jiu-jitsu. I teach the center. I can't please the margins. There are guys in my gym that only want to do half guardy, only want to do takedowns, and I can't please those guys. So I teach something somewhere in the center. And it seems to work. That's my recommendation as a coach. As an athlete, I've seen both be successful. I've seen athletes that work on, various techniques and they're successful. And I've seen guys that only do 2 things and they're successful. So to me, success, the success is not contingent on how you practice how many techniques you practice. It's more contingent on how you see winning and how important it is to you. Like, that's what it comes down to. Like, how much does it mean to you winning? And, you can see some people quit in the middle of their matches. And, it's in them. It's not in them to push that extra, push through that threshold in order to win. And that's something that's very difficult to train.
Yeah. I've got a question from Nathan that's interesting as well, looking at the current day competitive grappling with, ACBJJ. How important is it for the competitors to make it exciting versus to just go out there and try to win?
First of all, with ACB, I think ACB is single-handedly the most exciting event that's ever existed in jiu-jitsu. I'm not saying it because I work for the guys. It really is. I think they the thing is, this is the thing about marketing. You get 1 or 2 bad matches and it becomes the whole story. Well, you can select that at any event. I can find a bad match or a bad moment and you can make that the whole story. Or you can make that one good moment the whole story. And that's something that it comes down to perception. Like all you see is all there is. So if you select, this is what in political terms we call propaganda. You select one little piece of truth. It's probably true, and you make that little piece of truth the whole story, right? And then you can ignore all these other facts. ACB, the last show, for example, there are 21 fights. There are maybe 3 that were slow out of 21. That's not bad. Overall, it was a great show, but it had 3 slow matches. Oh, so now it was no, because there was a focus on the 3, not on the rest. I think ACB is single-handedly the most exciting event I've ever seen in all of jiu-jitsu, because and then they're long. You got to remember the matches are long too. The event is long, but if you actually look at the matches individually, they're very exciting. Like they go balls to the wall. Like you're gonna get some slow matches, but that's normal for all rule sets. Like I've never seen a rule set where the slow matches don't exist. You got to remember that's how sports are. Like people they have this idealistic approach to sports. Like, oh, like if the guy really wanted to. I even heard someone say it's all about the coaching and how you train people. And if you train them to be aggressive, they will. Like that's nonsense. You're denying like what every single sport every athlete in the world knows. You're gonna set a rule frame. You're gonna set a time limit, and people are gonna work around these limits, and they're gonna push it to the extreme. How to maximize their outcome, minimizing their effort. And this is across the board. Everyone does this. No one is doing otherwise. Like it's just like this idealistic but unrealistic approach to sports. You see it in every sport, like group or individual. People buy time. People play by the rules. You saw Neymar in the last World Cup faking an injury. Why is he doing that? He's buying time. He's trying to get the guy to get a yellow card. Like strategy exists in any competitive endeavor. Sports are no different. Now, when you're thinking like you can think as a spectator, you want to see a show. I get that. Promoter, yeah, you want to sell tickets. The fighter's trying to win, and as long as the rules allow it, they're going to be doing exactly that. I don't think they're ever going to find a perfect rule set. I think there are things we can do to make jiu-jitsu more exciting, to make it more appealing, but I don't think we'll ever find a perfect rule set. But as is, I think ACB has found something close to it. Like I suggested some changes to, I think, make it even more exciting. We're going to be able to make it more dynamic. I think one reason why, I think they're almost like they came out so hard trying to make jiu-jitsu exciting for the public that they're putting too many matches on. 21 matches is too much. Like maybe less matches, and but at the same time, like they're just trying to give these guys the opportunity to fight like 6 times a year. So they've been great for jiu-jitsu. You can see that their intentions are pure, and they're really trying to do what's best for the sport. But I think with anything else, it takes some time shape. It takes some selecting, like what do we got? We're going to narrow it down to the best format. But I think that their intentions are the best possible, and I like the rules. I think that with other rule sets, there are things that everyone has an idea of how jiu-jitsu should be. I think that one mistake people make, and this is a widespread mistake and misconception, is that jiu-jitsu is all about the submission, and jiu-jitsu is all about the submission if you see it as a sport. If you only see it as a sport, and you can say that, like judokas can say jiu-jitsu, it's all about the takedown, for example, right? Or and the UFC fighter may say it's all about the money. They have if you say it's all about one thing, you can say that. But if you look at it from a broad perspective, to me, jiu-jitsu is still a martial art that I practice in a sport format. If you view jiu-jitsu as a martial art, submission is not the only thing. In fact, in some situations, submission might be a horrible idea. Let's say self-defense, for example. Let's consider self-defense, right? Jiu-jitsu is often called, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is often called the most efficient form of self-defense form out there. Okay, let's consider that for a second. Most fights, first off, from my experience, they last 30 seconds to a minute. From my experience, right? They're not very long.
Hold on, I gotta get you. From your experience as fights you've been in, or fights you've seen, or
no, street fights,
okay,
like self-defense situations. 30 seconds to a minute.
Okay,
that's what we're used to seeing. Most fights, from my experience, they occur in bars and nightclubs.
Yeah, and
someone breaks it apart. In a bar or a nightclub, do you really think it's a good idea to armbar someone from close guard? Think about it.
It's a
horrible idea.
Yeah,
it's a horrible idea. When you really think about it, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is not like it is a great form of self-defense if there's an assumption, and it's a very a wishful thinking kind of assumption that it's going to be you and your opponent, no one else. No one's going to interfere, and the terrain is flat. It's not slippery. There are no obstacles. There are no weapons, and his friends are not going to jump in. The truth of the matter is, if you rear naked choke someone in a nightclub, you're going to get kicked in the head. So, my point is, positioning is super important for jiu-jitsu, and I think that's something a lot of people neglect. This is always been my beef with submission only, is that they completely neglect it. They think, it's all about the submission. It's a horrible idea. If you believe jiu-jitsu is supposed to be efficient in MMA and in the streets, if you believe that what happens in MMA and self-defense situations is meaningless, yeah, you can just worry about heel hooking people and rear naked choking them. But in a real situation, putting someone in a heel hook might be a horrible idea. In fact, from my experience, it probably is a horrible idea. You're better off learning how to get on top, establish top position, and get on your feet and running if you have to, or better off running in the first place. That might be a better form of self-defense. The reason I insist on positioning as well as submission is so the practitioner in a real situation, or if he ever decides to transition to MMA, he has the option of doing both. Positioning is extremely important for jiu-jitsu, for fighting. Just watch the UFC. You're going to see the UFC. Like most, I suspect there are probably more TKOs on the ground than submissions, or it might be close to it at least. So learning how to position yourself, how to hold position, how to take someone down, how to hold them down is extremely important from a fighting perspective, whether that's MMA or self-defense. Now, if we go, jiu-jitsu is only about the submission, I don't care about getting on top, I don't care about controlling top position, okay, then you can say, okay, jiu-jitsu about the submission, and you can have whatever format you please. But keep in mind that if we do that, we have lost jiu-jitsu as a martial art almost completely, because the style that will be practiced is a style that has nothing to do with fighting.
Wow. Okay. And I was just going to throw in there, like, with some of the matches, you're talking about competitive jiu-jitsu, and they don't end in a submission, or they're a little bit less exciting. That's because it's a close match, and they're two guys that are well matched.
Absolutely.
And you could
Absolutely.
they could put a match me versus you, and it would be pretty entertaining. Like, you could do whatever you want and throw me around, and you can make up something.
And it happens when a sport, when they reach no man's land. That's what I call no man's land, where the fight takes place. Whenever a sport reaches a point where everyone knows where their first trench is and where no man's land is, it's going to slow down, because you're going to put all your defense and your offense there in the same place. And we see that happen as the guys get better. We see this happen in boxing. That's why boxing got boring. And the UFC wasn't like that until what? Until they started what? They've reached that no man's land. Everyone knows where the fight takes place. We have reached that middle ground. There are no extremes anymore. So what happens? It slows down. The pace slows down. And it's only because both fighters are very skilled and they're not making mistakes. And they found what that middle ground is. And that is normal across. That's what makes sports competitive. Now, if you really want something entertaining, like you said, you can put someone who's been trained their whole life against someone who's been trained for 6 months, for example. And then it's going to be entertaining. You're going to see those flying arm bars. But is that competitive, athletics? Like, it's not. So I think one thing the public needs to understand is that competitive endeavors, when both opponents are skilled or both teams are skilled, the match is going to be slow. And it's just a testament to how evolved the sport is. I appreciate the strategy. I appreciate the competitiveness. A match that is won by one advantage does not bore me. It can bore me, but it does not necessarily bore me. It also may be an extremely entertaining match because it had to fight for every single little inch so hard. And if you understand what's going on, I can appreciate the effort and how much genius is involved there. But if the public is just about entertainment, then my suggestion is you got to watch pro wrestling. I think pro wrestling is very entertaining. It's not realistic, but it's very entertaining. Right? To me, I didn't start training jiu-jitsu because it was entertaining. I started training jiu-jitsu because it was efficient. And I think that people shouldn't lose track of that. Yeah.
And then you put somebody like you on a microphone, and it really makes it a much more spectator-friendly event, because I may not know what they're trying to do, but if you're telling me, okay, if this guy gets to this position, he's going to be in trouble. So, we're watching this hand battle here. It's actually a pretty big deal. And that it makes good commentary, makes something like jiu-jitsu, which is pretty hard for people to watch sometimes if you don't know what's going on. It makes it a lot more friendly, because it's just like watching any sport on mute. You have no idea what's going on unless you're really skilled at it.
Yeah, so like that's what I try to do. Like, a match slows down, the guy's in close guard taking a break. It's a long match too. If title fights 5-minute rounds, these guys are not superhumans, so it's normal for the match to slow down. Sometimes me and Brawley would drift about a random conversation. We'll try to joke around, make it like a podcast. I'll tell a story. He'll tell a story. We'll analyze some technique. We're talking about a psychological aspect of jiu-jitsu. And, I get a lot of positive feedback about that, because I feel like I can do, that for about like almost anything, I can drift into talking about the psychological aspect of jiu-jitsu, which is something a lot of people talk about. I think we're overwhelmed with technique, which is great, but there's a lot more to jiu-jitsu than techniques. I mean, techniques is one aspect of jiu-jitsu, and I think it's not even the most important one, to be frank.
Yeah.
There's so much more to jiu-jitsu than just like learning new techniques. But I feel that everyone's obsessed with that, and they're losing on other aspects of the art that are even more beautiful, in my opinion. And I try to touch on that when I do when I commentate, and I get a lot of positive feedback. I never know where that line is because I listen to most commentating, and they never do that. So I don't want to cross the line. So I'm like, what are you doing? You're not being a normal commentator. But I mean, I like to do it even more because I feel that's what people get the most from. Like it's, especially if the match is slow, if they're in closed guard and there's nothing happening, I'd rather drift into something, then maybe teach them a lesson that's not about, closing the guard because they already know that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just you're making the time of the viewers more valuable, the experience better, because like I don't watch golf on TV, but I imagine they're talking constantly in golf because there's not a ton of action going on. They're talking about who's in the lead, who won last year, who's this and that. And
go ahead. Sorry.
And the good thing for you in your spot is most people that watch jiu-jitsu do jiu-jitsu, and that's a big deal. And so your conversations, they're going to be more interesting automatically because we're on a similar page, or we want to be on the page with you and understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah. Like like I said, and there's so many topics to approach, and like jiu-jitsu goes well beyond just what's going on, who's sweeping who, and I think that people unconsciously they're aware of all these other elements to jiu-jitsu, but they're not talked about, so they're not part of the conversation. And I try to make a part of the conversation and like have like a broader scope on what jiu-jitsu is, and it represents to people on a personal level as well.
Yeah, that's ACB is doing a lot of things right, and one of them is having you guys up there and commentating, and that really I think that opens the doors to everybody in being able to watch it. And even if you're not nearly as skilled or you don't have a large knowledge base, hearing what you guys are saying makes it a way more enjoyable experience. And you can watch them on YouTube. It's super easy to go watch these things.
These guys are so nice. It's free too. Like they could be charging like at least $50 a person to watch it. That's like cream of the crop, best grapplers in the world, going to war. Like 21 matches. They're going to war, like beautiful, like the best, very best guys in the world. It's like absolute world champ. IBJJF offers that once a year in the open weight class. That's when you're going to see all those big names in one day. That's it. Once a year, IBJJF offers that. These guys are offering it once a month. It's incredible when you think about it. It's just, I think that the public doesn't fully appreciate the generosity of these guys, that they're doing it for free.
Yeah.
Like I've even heard criticism. Like people get on their case because like, oh, the guy is Muslim or something. Like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like you should be thanking these guys for what they're doing for jiu-jitsu. But I guess people just always look for a reason to hate.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. You talk about the generosity. You've been very generous today with your time. Do you have any last bits of wisdom or advice you have for the guys and gals out there who are out there training and trying to do their best at jiu-jitsu?
Make sure you do it for the right reasons. I feel that, a lot of people are doing it for the wrong reasons. And what I mean by that is if you go to bed at night, and I use this analogy. I've been using it a lot recently because it's become how I look at myself. It's become a mirror, so to speak. Because sometimes you don't have a mirror. You don't look at yourself. You're not aware of what you really love and, what you really want from life. And to me, when I go to bed at night, I'm dreaming. Before I go to sleep, I'm dreaming. I'm daydreaming, right? I'm thinking about the things I want to do, the things I have done, and I think of, and that right there is who you are. That's your heart. That's where your heart is. And I remember when I was younger, I was dreaming about being a world champion. That's all. I go to bed 2 a.m. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It's just I had to be a world champion. These days, I think about different things. I think about putting on a better documentary, or I think about what I'm going to write in my book review for school tomorrow, or I'm thinking about what can I do to be a better parent or a better coach. And like these things are on my mind before I go to bed. But I think a lot of my advice to the young competitors, think about what is it that how do you picture yourself? When before you go to bed, is it just the medal that you're thinking about, or are you doing it for the self-improvement, or are you doing it for the applause? And I think a lot of people are doing it for the applause. They're doing it for the money and the recognition. And if you're doing it for that reason, you're doing it for the wrong reason. And I say this with a certain degree of confidence. I've met a lot of successful people in not only Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA, but other departments of life, in business and other sports and, music. I'm very successful people, in fact. And they all had one thing in common. The ones that were very successful, they had the right motivation. They were truly in love with the art. When the art was an end in itself. They weren't using the art as a trampoline for something else. There was nothing else. It was an end in itself, not a means to an end. And I think a lot of people in martial arts and sports in general and other endeavors as well, they're using the art as a means to achieve something else. I need this. This is a vehicle for my recognition. It is a vehicle to make money. This is a vehicle for my, to get a little, maybe for my own vanity, for very vain reasons. And when I look at people doing that, it's so sad because they're missing out on the best jiu-jitsu has to offer. So my advice to people would be to look at the true reasons. Look at yourself in the mirror, and go, why am I doing this? And you should be doing it for the right reasons. It's because you love the art as an end in itself, not because you're trying to get something out of it. Jiu-jitsu has offered me enough. So I don't want anything from jiu-jitsu anymore. It's given me too much already. I have a debt towards jiu-jitsu. So I try to give back any way I can. And, I maybe I'm in some element of self-deception here, but I believe my reasons have always been pure. That's why I was able to accomplish almost everything I ever wanted to accomplish in the sport. I've always felt I was doing it for the right reason. I was never going to do it for the money. I was never going to do it for any other reason than I love the art. And that's why I retired from fighting. Like, I wasn't in love with fighting and winning anymore. It stopped being important to me. So I'm not going to do it for a paycheck. I'm going to do it because I want to improve on myself. I want to prove it to myself that I can do it. And to me, that's the real motivation. That's a noble reason. That's why you should be fighting. If you're fighting for other reasons, you might want to rethink why you're doing what you're doing.
Yep, you got to know your why. That's awesome. Thanks so much for jumping on here with me.
Absolutely, man. It's my pleasure. Anytime.
And I want to thank Robert Drysdale for hopping on here with us and sharing some of his story. It's like a behind-the-scenes look at the documentary and really what's going into it and looking at the goals he has of making something that will stand the test of time and that will be like a learning tool for everybody in jiu-jitsu as far as learning about the history, learning about your roots. And really looking forward when this comes out. Hoping to get him back on the show when this does come out or around that time. I know he'll be a very busy guy, but I'm excited. So follow him. I'll put links in the show notes. Follow the project on Facebook or social media, and that way you'll be up to date with what's happening and what step they're in as far as editing and piecing this thing together and getting it produced. Man, this is exciting.
Yeah, great show. Hey, if you're listening to this episode, it's probably because you like jiu-jitsu and you've got friends that like jiu-jitsu too. So tell a friend about us. Maybe find us on Facebook. You can find the episode and just share a link with your buddies. Yep,
it always helps us grow. Sharing it online is good, but odds are you have a whole gym full of people, and a couple of them wouldn't mind listening to us once a week.
Or twice a week, the first week of the month. We always have the BJJ Brick extra episode.
Oh, yeah, we had that just a couple days ago, guys.
Yes.
2 for the price of 1.
And they're free. We do have an article this week from jiu-jitsujunkie.co. The article is titled, You Be the Hammer, I'm the Nail. And it's an interesting perspective on jiu-jitsu, and it kind of starts with the author, Catherine, and her start with jiu-jitsu. And I was really impressed by her team welcoming her to the mats. And I think that it's hard for anybody to start jiu-jitsu, and add one more, level of difficulty for a woman to start jiu-jitsu in a room full of just dudes. And that's what she was up against. She had a room, a bunch of guys in there, and a lot of upper belts. And she's like, well, this is not going to be fun. This is going to be terrible. Everyone's going to be way better than me. And everyone is a lot bigger than me, and kind of was telling herself, well, should I just leave or I should stick around? And she was pleasantly surprised that people were happy to train with her, were happy to give her compliments on her ability on the mats, whether it was, like, hey, good hip movement, or, hey, you're quick with that one, or you picked that up today, we just did that, that's great. Like, find something early on to compliment somebody on. And it's true. Like, don't just say, something that's not sincere. But if you see something positive about a new person, tell them, or anybody. But and that will really help
Byron,
with the motivation. Here we go. What's my compliment, Gary?
Oh, I like your hair today. It looks great.
It looks. You said great or gray?
It looks great. Great.
Oh,
good job, Byron.
Well, thanks, Gary. Although you can't see me.
But I always keep a picture of you right in front of me. You're my screensaver.
That means a lot, Gary. But I just like the way her team welcomed her in, and any team like that is going to eventually be a very strong team and have a diverse group of members.
Yeah, something I really liked is all the compliments were sincere. None of them were BS. And I get the impression from reading the article that it was helping her to understand that as a small person, there's actually things you can use in your favor. She talks about being quick and getting into small spaces and having active hips. And man, I find a small person who's really good at jiu-jitsu just about as tough to roll with as a big, strong guy. So yeah, she was growing and she was learning. And she has a statement that she makes in here about the hammer being effective, but only if it actually hits the nail square on. So she's using the attributes that she brings to the mats to level the playing field a little bit.
We were talking earlier with Byron about making excuses, and that's what I like about this, where, even though we were joking about this, but this is perfect because, she's talking about she may be smaller, but, she can be first to a position, her smallness allows her to get out of difficult spots easier, She said, I may be the nail at practice, but the hammer has to hit the nail precisely or it'll miss, So instead of saying, hey, I'm the smallest person in here, this is a disadvantage, I'm going to, have a frowny face. She finds out what works best for her. She's like, hey, there's a lot of things that being smaller and quicker are going to give me an advantage. And I'm going to look at those and I'm going to use those to my advantage and have a great time.
Yeah, and then she talks about the attributes of actual nail. It pierces the wall. It can hold a lot of weight. It's a valuable tool. It's just kind of interesting to look at that as not just hammer hitting the nail. Actually, don't be the wall, but the nail is an important part of the hammer and the nail. And we've heard this before. Some days you're the hammer, some days you're the nail, but. Her look at it is pretty neat. And
I've never heard anybody talk about it like that. I always hear about some days you're the hammer, some days you're the nail, but this is the first time I've seen somebody go down this path, and I love it.
You leave class, you feel like, I did great today. Everybody, I was all over them, and I did a lot of submissions, whatever. I was a hammer today. Some days you leave class like, man, I got beat up by everybody today. I was the nail. But really, there's benefits to both of those. And if you're the hammer all the time, you're definitely missing on something. And if you're the nail, and you could be there for a little while and feel like you're getting kind of beat on. Well, like she does, work on not getting hit square with the hammer. Just become if you're getting submitted 3 to 5 times in a 5-minute roll. Well, the person's probably being a bit aggressive anyway for you, but try to gauge that back. Try to make them submit you 3 to 4 times or 2 to 4 times or whatever. Like, just make incremental improvements where you're not doing quite as bad as you were. You're adjusting dials on the game here, but you're not adjusting them like to where you're submitting somebody. You're just getting submitted less often, and maybe not the same thing every time, or maybe you're finding ways out, and they're having to transition or to catch you on a second or third move in a series instead of the first one working right away. Just find those smaller goals and reach for those, and that's what nails have to do. And we're all the nail sometimes, and sometimes you could use a screw. And
there you go down that path, Byron.
And Gary and Joe have been working on their own audiobook. We've got a couple audiobooks that I haven't actually made, and they're for sale. Gary and Joe are in the process of thinking about making an audiobook called Screw Loose Jiu-Jitsu. And, it's when you're a little bit crazy and, people say, hey, he's got a screw loose. I don't know where they'll take this, but really the phrase means something's not right with that person. And so just interested to see where you guys are going to go with this book and who you're going to be able to help with a book that is people who are a little bit out there.
Well, this is different than our previous audiobooks in that this is actually a biography. And we wrote this book about you, Byron.
Oh, nice.
Screw Loose Jiu-Jitsu. So we wanted to write a book about somebody crazy that we knew in the jiu-jitsu world, and you were the craziest person we know.
You know what that tells me? You don't know very many crazy people.
Oh, no, Byron. If you ask probably about 500 people, 499 would say it was you. And then the only person who wouldn't would be yourself. So okay. I think it is true.
Okay. Well, looking back at some of the things that have happened, some of the crazier things, man, you guys have a little pamphlet of crazy you're ready to pass out.
Well, Joe and I were talking about some of the crazy things you've done, and we don't know if you've got that from your 7 or 8 stints in prison now, because I know that once you get into prison, you don't want to get messed with. Because from what I've heard from talking to other people who knew you while you were younger, you weren't that same way. You came out differently after each time in the pen there. You came out a little bit different. Yeah. But I think that was, to keep yourself protected in prison. And I know because you do take showers, as we talk about in the tagline of BJJ Brick, stay sweaty and don't forget to shower. So I know that you did take showers in prison.
The tagline has changed, and it's stay showering.
Oh, okay.
You see what we're doing on that one, Gary?
Yeah, I see.
So we don't want to monopolize the conversation here, Byron, but we did include a chapter on your revolutionizing of the donkey guard while in prison, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Yeah, I think Gary was talking about like odd guards a couple weeks ago, and how he doesn't have much.
We're not talking about me. We're talking about you revolutionized the donkey guard, Byron.
I was just reflecting a couple weeks ago, Gary, and how
hey, the
I was learning from what you were
about that.
Your knowledge bombs that you were dropping. But I don't even know where to go with this, guys. The donkey guard wasn't designed for prisons, but I would say it's probably perfected in a prison.
And then another thing that that's made you a little strange is we know you're a flat earther, and you use that. You use that for your top pressure. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you've got like some people talk about doing push-ups or earth downs, but if the earth is flat, so I can't even begin to think about how the earth could be flat. I've tried to work this, guys. For the prison break. You wait till the earth does a periodic shift in flatness and you could just hop right over the wall. I don't know, guys. I don't understand this whole flat earth thing. I think the flat earth thing is great, and we'll probably get an email about it, because anybody who actually believes it, you don't have to believe anything else they say. Like, maybe some conspiracies are true, but if you bought that one, I'm not buying anything you say. And I think it's a great filter to use on people.
Well, that's kind of why Joe and I don't agree with a lot of stuff you say, because we know you're a flat earther. You've brought it up numerous times, and so that's kind of, maybe it'll make a little bit of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that story he always tells about the one time he almost fell off the edge of the earth.
Yeah, and I love it how he talks about how he fell off the edge of the earth, but the way it's helped his jiu-jitsu is he hung on by his fingertips and did pull-ups. He did a set of 100 pull-ups, which increased his grip strength, which allowed his gi game to get better. Plus, he built up his biceps and his back, which is going to help him in jiu-jitsu. And he says he does that at least once a week now. He travels to the edge of earth to do that.
Yeah. It's a lot of work, but you got to be dedicated. And I can't rest on my accomplishments of the past, Gary.
The other thing is, I remember when you were telling me you were a white belt, and there was a white belt that was better than you, and you knew you were going to get him in the end of the tournament. So what you did is you asked him if you wanted to go get some ice cream, and you took him to an ice cream parlor at the edge of the earth, and you guys both rode your bikes there. You had these really cool BMX bikes. And
Okay.
So what you did is you put up a ramp right there by some bushes, so you couldn't see that was the edge of the earth, and then you bet him that he couldn't get 3 or 4 feet in the air. And so when he jumped, he fell off the edge of the earth, and you had nobody else in your bracket, so you got first.
Mostly true, Gary.
Everybody's still like, what happened to Carl?
Yeah. What happened was I unscrewed the brakes on his bike. He had a screw loose, and he just flew off the edge of the earth. So that really is how
there
they
we
got
go
the title
back.
of the book.
With a screw loose. And I think with that, that should be, that's the end of this talk about
Thank
having a screw
goodness.
loose.
Because you guys turned that one on me pretty quick.
Well, Joe did. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, anytime.
Well
anytime.
played. I'd like to thank our Patreon supporters. If you listen to the show and you're like, hey, I'd like to help these guys keep what they're doing and actually do a little bit better of a job with funding, we have more opportunities open up to us. And then that's really what Patreon has been for us. So thank you, Dennis, Brian, and our newest Patreon supporter, Rodney, for stepping up, sending some support our way. Most Patreon supporters donate $1 per episode, and that really helps out a lot. It's just $1 for you, but ultimately, as a group, this is making the podcast worth all the time and energy we're putting into it, and really giving us some opportunities to train together and to hopefully do some stuff in the future that we wouldn't be able to do without the money. So thanks, guys. And as a token of support, we'll mail you out, or I will mail you out, a 5-inch BJJ Brick gi patch. I'll throw a sticker in the envelope as well. And I think I have one autographed picture of Gary left to send out. He did those as a prank was pulled on him. Gary's not a person that would sign autographs of himself like this, but hey, if you want an autographed picture of Gary, there's one left. Maybe there's two. I don't see for sure.
It could be worth a lot of money in the long run.
It's not going to be worth any money at all, ever. But
there he goes, putting people down, Byron. I like to bring people up, not put them down.
Hey, I did go through the trouble of making these great pictures for you to autograph. It could be worth a few bucks. But what we want to do is put that in the envelope and send it out to you if you're one of the next people to support us on Patreon. And Rodney, being one of our newest members, got a picture of Gary autographed, delivered fresh to his address. And so, yeah, a lot of fun. And you get to kind of poke fun at Gary by being one of the next Patreon supporters. Guys, it's been a fun episode. Man, a pleasure to get Robert Drysdale on here. Yeah, what a legend in the sport. So stay sweaty, my friends.
And don't believe the flat earthers.
Train hard, train smart, train somewhere in the northern or southern hemisphere, which you couldn't do on a flat earth, and get better. We'll see you on the mats, guys.
And don't go too close to the edge because you might fall off.
You may have a screw loose on your bike. You never know. Just like poor Carl.
This episode is dedicated towards Carl.
We now have a moment of peace for Carl. I'm sorry, a moment of silence.
Quit talking during the silent moment, Gary.
Thank you for listening. I hope you find the time today to roll. After all, the best way to get better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.